We're joined now by Rachel Evans, the co-author of this study, and she is from Georgetown. She's a legal fellow at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you.
When the two of you, Joanna and Rachel, were working on this report, what was the impetus? How did Shelby, the decision in Shelby that you just spoke about, how did that impact voting rights in California in terms of the dilution issue?
Well, it definitely had a huge impact here in California. And as we mentioned earlier, Monterey County was removed from pre-clearance coverage under Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And again, that was to get permission from the federal government before they changed their election systems. There was a case called Lopez versus Monterey County, which addressed vote dilution. What is vote dilution, right? Vote dilution occurs when you have a community that is, maybe it's historically majority white, and then you have a community that is not white, that is not a majority of that community. So for example, in an at-large, what we'd call an at-large election system, where everybody in that city votes for every city council member, and that community is 60% white, or the voters are 60% white and 40% Latino. In that at-large system, every single time, if 60% of the white voters vote one way and 40% of the Latino voters vote another way, and both groups vote pretty cohesively with their own ethnic group, you have what we call racially polarized voting, what others may call the segregation of the electorate. And when that occurs in such a way as it prevents the minority community from having an equal vote to elect a candidate of choice, that is vote dilution.
And what is the solution to vote dilution?
Well, there are a couple of legal protections that we have in place, thanks in part to the Federal Voting Rights Act of 1965. Section 2, which we talked about earlier, is permanent. It can be, it's useful for communities that have experienced vote dilution and keep voting for candidates that never get elected because every single time they're being blocked by a cohesive white voting bloc. Section 2 can provide a remedy by splitting up an at-large system into a district-based system where communities of color can actually have access to a meaningful right to vote and elect a candidate who lives in their district, who reflects the needs of the community, who's accountable to the community. We also have the California Voting Rights Act, which was enacted over a decade ago and has been very successful here in California in ensuring that vote dilution stops dead in its tracks and actually breaks up at-large systems that do just that and creates these district-based systems. But vote dilution can continue to occur in district-based systems too. Under Section 2, there have been many cases across the country, including some here in California that we talked about. Lopez versus Monterey County was a Section 5 case that looked at Section 2. But not to get too deep into the weeds here, this can happen where communities are broken up into smaller and smaller fractions where they have no meaningful voice, or they can be packed into one district so they can only elect one candidate out of a slate of 5 city council members in a local jurisdiction, for example. So vote dilution impacts California because over the last 10 years, we've seen 140 jurisdictions voluntarily change from an at-large system to a district-based system to comply with the California Voting Rights Act. And over 20 cases filed, 16 of which have already been successful either on the merits or they've settled with the plaintiffs. So we know that vote dilution either persists in California or that communities are on the lookout to see whether their local boards, school boards, city councils, local governing boards are truly diverse and truly representative of the community.
Rachel, how can counties provide better training to prevent issues like suppression, intimidation, and deception?
You're very right that here in California, even in the 21st century, we're seeing issues of voter intimidation and voter suppression and voter deception. And I think you're right that one of the larger causes of these issues, or something that perpetuates it, is poor poll worker training. Here in the United States, we have a very decentralized system, and so the training of poll workers is left up to the individual counties. And so I think that we need to have a more unified system and a system with checks and balances to ensure that each of these poll workers is trained adequately. This is especially important because we rely on volunteers to do our polling and poll worker trainings. And so if we don't have adequate training in place and a cohesive system throughout the state, then we will continue to see problems on election day in the polling stations, in the precincts.
We're in California. Do we really have voter suppression?
We truly do. It's disturbing, especially in the 21st century, that we still see issues throughout the state of voter intimidation and voter deception. Voter intimidation occurs when a person, a voter, a community is intimidated through violence or threats of violence or threats of some other thing happening to them. And this intimidation changes the way that they vote or prevents them from voting at all. As I said before, these poll workers are volunteers. And so personally, I think that there needs to be better recruitment of volunteers, encouraging people that have an impact in their communities to go ahead and serve and do this public duty. And along with that, structurally, we need to have a system in place that ensures that each of these poll workers receives the training in the laws, knows the laws, and that there's some sort of checks and balances in each polling station to ensure that no impropriety is happening, either by third parties or the poll workers themselves.
Thank you, Rachel and Joanna, for your important work on this study. For more information about the League of Women Voters of San Francisco and ways for you to get involved in our important work on voting rights, please visit our website at lwvsf.org. Or to find out more information about this important study on voting rights barriers in California, please go to lccr.com.